The cold bit through everything that morning along the Colmar pocket, seeping past wool and canvas and leather until it settled into bone. Staff Sergeant Elijah Morse crouched in the tree line above the narrow road that twisted through the Vosges foothills, his breath coming out in clouds that hung in the January air like accusatory ghosts. His hands, dark against the frost-rimed metal of the M1919 Browning, had gone numb an hour ago. He flexed his fingers inside his gloves, trying to keep the blood moving, trying to keep ready for what his gut told him was coming down that road. Behind him, in a shallow depression scraped out of the frozen earth, Private First Class Raymond Tucker and Private Monroe Collins lay pressed against their packs, rifles cradled against their chests. They were all that remained of 2nd Squad after the German counteroffensive had torn through their lines 3 days prior. 3 black soldiers from the 333rd Field Artillery Battalion, separated from their unit, cut off, and now occupying a nameless hillock above a nameless road in eastern France while the rest of the American forces tried to hold together what remained of their positions. Morse had been a sharecropper's son from outside Tuscaloosa before the army had taken him. 28 years old, broad-shouldered and deliberate in his movements. He'd spent 2 years proving to white officers that he could read a map, that he could lead men, that he deserved the stripes on his sleeve. The proving never stopped. Even now, even here, even with death sitting patient as fog in the valley below, part of his mind was calculating how this would be reported, whether anyone would believe what he'd seen, whether anyone would care. "Sarge," Tucker whispered, his voice tight. "You really think they're coming up this way?" Morse didn't turn from his position behind the machine gun. He'd set it up with deliberate care at the apex of a hairpin turn where the road climbed steeply through the forest. To his right, the hillside dropped away sharply into a ravine choked with winter-dead brush. To his left, the slope rose at an angle too steep for vehicles. Any column using this road would have to slow to walking pace around this turn, would have to bunch up, would be exposed. "They're coming," Morse said. "Saw their scouts yesterday evening. They got pushed back north of Jebsheim, and this road's the only way through these hills that won't bog down their armor. They need this route to resupply their positions, and they need it today." "How many you think?" Collins asked. He was 19, from Detroit, still carrying the city in his voice. His hand shook slightly as he checked his M1 Garand for the 4th time in 10 minutes. "Enough," Morse said. The truth was worse than that. Yesterday, from a concealed observation point half a mile south, Morse had watched through binoculars as a German column assembled in the captured village of Grussenheim. He'd counted vehicles until his eyes ached. 27 in total, half-tracks bristling with troops, trucks loaded with ammunition and supplies, a handful of armored cars, 2-towed anti-tank guns, and what looked like a command vehicle near the center. Easily 300 men, maybe more. A reinforced company, at least, moving with the kind of desperate efficiency that marked veteran troops who knew time was running out. He'd radioed it in on their -300 Seychelles rupees, reported the enemy's strength and probable route to Captain Brennan, their white commanding officer stationed 8 miles back with the battalion rear echelon. The radio had crackled with static and distance, and when Brennan's voice finally came through, it carried the familiar edge of dismissal that Morse had learned to recognize in white officers' tones. "Are you certain of those numbers, Sergeant?" Brennan had asked, the unspoken doubt hanging heavy as the static. "Yes, sir. 27 vehicles. 300 personnel. Estimate." A long pause. Then, "Hold your position. Observe and report. Do not, I repeat, do not engage. We'll redirect the 101st to intercept." But Morse had seen the map. The 101st was committed to the fighting around Herlesheim, locked into a brutal house-to-house struggle that was eating men like a furnace. There would be no reinforcements. There would be no interception. The German column would roll up this road, would break through to their forward positions, and American boys would die because of it. He'd acknowledged the order, he'd signed off the radio, and then he'd stayed exactly where he was, making his calculations, studying the terrain, and preparing the machine gun position with the kind of meticulous care his father had taught him when setting fence posts in Alabama clay. Now the morning fog was lifting, and Morse could hear what Tucker and Collins couldn't yet: the distant mechanical growl of engines laboring in low gear, the metallic clink and rattle of a column in motion. It came from the south, growing louder, and with it came the smell of diesel exhaust drifting through the winter forest. "Here they come," Morse said quietly. "Tucker, you watch our left flank. Anything comes up that slope, you holler. Collins, you're on the right. Nobody gets behind us. When this starts, it's going to get loud and it's going to get confused. You hold your positions and you do not fire until I tell you." Understood? Understood, Sarge, they said together, but their voices carried the tremor of young men who just realized training was over and the real thing was about to begin. Morse settled in behind the Browning, adjusting his position slightly so the gun's traverse would cover the maximum arc of the road. He'd already ranged the key points, the oak tree at 200 yards where the lead vehicle would first come into full view, the drainage culvert at 150 where the column would be most compressed, the hairpin itself at just under 100 yards where they'd be slowest and most vulnerable. The ammunition belts lay ready, 250 rounds in the first belt, 3 more boxes stacked within arm's reach. He'd checked the headspace twice. The gun was as ready as he could make it. The first vehicle nosed around the distant bend like a cautious animal. ASD KFC. 251 half-track, its gray-green paint dulled by winter campaign and road dust. Morse watched through the machine gun's sights as it crept forward. The driver visible in the open front, an officer standing in the back scanning the road ahead with binoculars. Standard German tactical movement. Scouts up front, main body following at interval. His finger rested alongside the trigger guard. Not yet. Let them commit, let them think the road was clear. The half-track advanced and behind it the column began to appear. Vehicle after vehicle nosing around the turn and starting up the grade. They bunched up just as Morse had predicted, the natural accordion effect of a column on a climbing mountain road compressing them together. A truck loaded with troops. Another half-track. 3 more trucks, their canvas covers straining over loaded cargo beds. An armored car with its turret traversed to watch the right side of the road. More trucks, more half-tracks, the German column stretching out like a steel centipede climbing toward his position. Morse's heart hammered against his ribs, but his breathing stayed slow and controlled. This was the moment that would define everything, not just whether he lived or died, but whether 3 black soldiers could do what the army had told them they couldn't do, what white officers assumed they wouldn't do. Every stereotype, every doubting glance, every order to drive trucks or dig latrines instead of fight, it all compressed down into this single moment on a frozen hillside in France. The lead half-track reached the hairpin turn. The driver downshifted, engine grinding, and the vehicle slowed to a crawl as it negotiated the tight curve. Behind it, the column compressed further, vehicles now separated by no more than 20 or 30 feet. Troops sat exposed in the truck beds, huddled against the cold. Officers conferred over maps. Nobody was looking up at the tree line where 3 American soldiers waited. "Steady," Morse whispered, though whether to himself or to Tucker and Collins he couldn't have said. The lead vehicle completed the turn and started to accelerate up the next straight section. The second vehicle entered the hairpin. The third was just approaching it. The heart of the column, the trucks heavy with supplies. The command vehicle with its radio antennas sat bunched together on the straight approach below the turn. Morse aimed for the engine block of the lead half-track, let out half a breath, and pressed the trigger. The Browning roared to life with a hammering violence that seemed to tear the winter morning apart. The first burst caught the half-track's radiator and punched through into the engine. And even over the gun's thunder, Morse heard the sharp scream of metal on metal followed by a gout of steam. The vehicle lurched sideways, its driver slumping, and ground to a halt at an angle that completely blocked the road. Morse traversed right without pausing, already firing again, the gun's rhythm steady and terrible. The second vehicle was just starting to react when his fire caught a broadside, bullets stitching across the cab and the crowded passenger compartment behind. Glass exploded. Men screamed. The vehicle veered wildly and crashed into the upslope embankment, its momentum dying, and now 2 vehicles blocked the road at the hairpin and the entire column was trapped. The Germans reacted with the speed of experienced troops. Officers were shouting orders even as men poured out of trucks and half-tracks, seeking cover, bringing weapons to bear. Return fire began almost immediately, rifles and machine pistols crackling in reply. But the Germans were firing uphill into trees and winter shadow, and they couldn't see exactly where Morse's position was. Bullets cracked through the branches above and slapped into the frozen earth. But the defilade Morse had chosen protected them. He kept firing in controlled bursts, methodical and precise. A truck's fuel tank ruptured and orange flame bloomed against the gray morning. Another burst caught a squad of infantry trying to deploy behind a half-track, cutting them down. He shifted aim to a vehicle in the middle of the column, punched through its canvas cover, and was rewarded by secondary explosions as ammunition cooked off inside. "Collins," Morse shouted over the gunfire. "They're trying to flank, right?" He'd seen it from the corner of his eye, a squad of Germans scrambling down into the ravine, trying to work their way around to a position where they could enfilade his machine gun. Collins opened up with his Garand, the distinctive ping of the semi-automatic rifle punctuating the Browning's deeper roar. One German fell, then another, and the rest went to ground in the ravine, pinned there but not eliminated. The German fire was getting more organized now. A machine gunner had set up behind the wrecked half-track at the hairpin and was laying down suppressive fire that forced Morse to duck. Bullets whipped overhead close enough to feel the displacement of air. Splinters exploded from the tree trunk protecting his position. The Germans were trying to keep him down while they reorganized, brought up heavier weapons, coordinated a proper assault. Morse changed the ammunition belt with practiced speed, his frozen fingers suddenly nimble with adrenaline. Tucker was firing now too, single-aim shots at targets Morse couldn't see on the left flank. The woods filled with smoke and the sharp chemical smell of burned propellant and the desperate shouts of men trying to kill each other. "They're bringing up something heavy," Tucker yelled. Morse looked and his stomach dropped. Near the rear of the column, German soldiers were manhandling a Pak-38 anti-tank gun off its tow hitch, wrestling it around to bring it to bear. If they got that gun into action, its high-velocity 50mm rounds would tear through his position like paper. He had perhaps 90 seconds before they had it ready to fire. He swung the Browning hard right, elevated slightly, and opened up on the gun crew. The range was long, nearly 300 yards, and firing downhill made the geometry tricky. But desperation sharpened his aim. The first burst fell short, kicking up frozen dirt. He adjusted, fired again, and saw one of the gun crew go down. The others scattered, but 2 brave or foolish souls stayed with the gun, still trying to bring it into battery. Morse held the trigger down longer than doctrine advised, burning through ammunition, walking the fire onto target. One of the remaining Germans jerked and fell. The other dove for cover behind a truck, and the anti-tank gun sat abandoned. A steel sculpture in the middle of the road that would kill no one today. But the respite was temporary. More Germans were deploying now, spreading out along both sides of the road, using the vehicles for cover, and their return fire was becoming a steady crackle that forced all 3 Americans to stay low. A grenade exploded somewhere on the upslope. Not close, but close enough to shower them with frozen earth and broken branches. "Sarge, we gotta move," Collins shouted. His face was gray with fear and black powder smoke. "They're gonna flank us?" "Hold position," Morse shouted back. His voice carried the flat authority of a man who'd made his decision and would see it through. "They move, we cut them down. They stay put, they starve on this road." Either way they're stopped, it was true. Looking down at the column, Morse could see the strategic picture even through the chaos. The German vehicles were jammed nose to tail, unable to advance or retreat. The lead vehicles were destroyed or disabled. The rear vehicles couldn't turn around on the narrow road. Any attempt to push forward on foot would mean advancing uphill under his machine gun fire. Any attempt to retreat would mean abandoning vehicles, ammunition, supplies, the very things this column had been sent to deliver. He'd done it. 3 men with 1 machine gun had stopped an entire German company. But stopping them and surviving them were different problems. A German mortar began dropping rounds into the forest, the dull crump of explosions walking closer as the crew found their range. Morse fired another burst at a squad trying to advance up the left slope, saw them scatter, then had to duck as a mortar round exploded 40 yards behind his position, close enough to feel the concussion through the frozen ground. "Sarge." Tucker's voice was urgent. "Radio." Morse slithered backward, leaving Collins to watch the machine gun's arc, and grabbed the handset. Static hissed and popped. He keyed it twice, their prearranged signal, and waited. Captain Brennan's voice came through, tight with what might have been anger or might have been fear. "Morse, what the hell is going on up there?" "We're hearing heavy engagement. German column, 27 vehicles." Stopped at map reference, Morse rattled off the coordinates from memory, shouting over another explosion. "Requesting artillery support. Over." A pause that lasted 3 heartbeats. "Morse, did you engage that column?" Against explicit orders, this was the moment. The court-martial moment. The moment when a black sergeant had to explain to a white captain why he'd disobeyed a direct order. But Morse had been proving himself his entire life, and he'd be damned if he stopped now. "Sir, the column was moving to break through our lines. No reinforcements were available. I made a tactical decision based on favorable terrain and enemy vulnerability. We have stopped their advance, but we need artillery support to finish them. Sir, if we don't destroy this column, they'll regroup and hit our positions before nightfall." The radio crackled. Wind whistled through the trees. A German bullet spanged off a rock 10 feet from Morse's head. "Finally. Hold your position. Artillery inbound. 10 minutes. Do not, and I mean do not, let that column get past you." "Roger that, sir." "We're not going anywhere. 10 minutes." Morse slithered back to the machine gun, took stock of his ammunition. 3 belts remaining, maybe 600 rounds. Collins and Tucker had perhaps 40 rounds of rifle ammunition between them. The Germans were still pinned, but they were also still trying to organize an assault. And professional soldiers trapped on a killing ground would eventually find a way forward or die trying. He settled in behind the Browning again, scanning for targets. The column looked like a junkyard now, vehicles burning or shot through, bodies scattered on the road and in the ditches, equipment strewn everywhere. But there were still plenty of live Germans down there, and they were getting organized. An officer was moving among the groups, rallying them, pointing toward Morse's position. The machine gunner at the hairpin was joined by a second gun. Rifle fire increased in volume and accuracy. "They're coming," Tucker said, and he was right. A wave of field gray uniforms rose from cover and started up the slope, not charging but advancing by fire and movement, professional infantry doing what infantry did. Perhaps 40 men moving in dispersed groups, covering each other. Morse waited until they were committed, until retreat would be as dangerous as advance, and then he opened up. The Browning sustained fire tore through the lead squad, and men tumbled backward or dove flat. Tucker and Collins fired as fast as they could work their rifles' actions, and the German advance staggered. But it didn't break. These were veterans, and they kept coming, using every tree and rock for cover, returning fire, getting closer. 50 yards now. Morse could see individual faces, could see the determination and fear mixed there. 30 yards. A German machine pistol raked his position, and splinters from the tree trunk drew blood across his cheek. 20 yards. Tucker shot a German officer who'd gotten ahead of his men, and the man fell backward with his arms spread wide like a child making snow angels. Then the world turned inside out as American artillery arrived. The first rounds fell long, overshooting the road and exploding in the forest beyond, but the forward observer corrected rapidly, and the next salvo landed directly on the column. High explosive shells detonated among the bunched vehicles with a violence that made the machine gun fire seem like children's firecrackers. A truck filled with ammunition went up in a secondary explosion that shook the entire hillside. A half-track was picked up and flung sideways like a toy. The assault on Morse's position collapsed as German infantry dove for any cover they could find. As officers lost control, as the careful organization dissolved into pure survival instinct. For 5 minutes, American 105mm howitzers turned that mountain road into hell on earth. Shells walked up and down the column, methodical and merciless, tearing apart steel and flesh with equal indifference. Morse and his men could only hunker down and endure, hands pressed over their ears, mouths open to equalize the pressure, while the ground bucked and shuddered and the air filled with smoke and flying metal. When the barrage lifted, the silence that followed seemed unnatural, broken only by the crackle of burning vehicles and the moans of wounded men. Morse raised his head cautiously and looked down at the road. The German column had ceased to exist as an organized military force. Every vehicle was destroyed or damaged beyond use. Bodies lay everywhere, some moving, most not. Survivors were staggering away from the road, back the way they'd come, abandoning equipment and wounded, simply trying to escape. No one was shooting anymore. The fight had been hammered out of them by artillery and a single determined machine gun. "Jesus Christ," Collins whispered. "Jesus Christ, Sarge, we did it." Tucker was crying silently, tears cutting tracks through the powder smoke and dirt on his face. Morse reached over and gripped his shoulder, said nothing because there was nothing to say. They'd survived. They'd done their jobs. 3 black soldiers had stopped a German company, had held a crucial piece of terrain, had proven something that shouldn't have needed proving, but that always did. But as Morse looked down at the carnage on that frozen road, at the burning vehicles and the sprawled bodies and the equipment that would never reach German front lines, he felt no triumph. Only exhaustion and a deep, bitter knowledge that when Captain Brennan wrote his report, the heroism would be described in terms of tactical necessity and favorable terrain and the effectiveness of American artillery. The machine gun position might get mentioned. The names of 3 black soldiers probably wouldn't. "Pack it up," he said quietly. "We need to get back to the battalion before dark." They broke down the machine gun in silence, hands working mechanically, and started the long walk back through the winter forest. Behind them, smoke rose into the gray sky from the destroyed column, a monument to what 3 men could do when they decided that orders mattered less than necessity, that proving themselves mattered less than doing what needed to be done. Morse didn't look back. He'd learned long ago that the respect you earned in battle sometimes died the moment you walked off the field. He'd learned that being right didn't matter as much as being white. That a black sergeant could stop an entire German column and still get questioned about whether he'd followed proper procedures. But he'd also learned that none of that changed the essential truth when the shooting started. When death sat patient in the valley and the only thing standing between victory and defeat was courage and skill and determination. A man's skin color mattered exactly as much as the snow that was starting to fall again through the trees. Which was to say, not at all. They walked through the forest as dusk gathered, 3 soldiers carrying a machine gun and its ammunition, their breath streaming out behind them in the cold, anonymous as any other soldiers in any other war. And if anyone asked them later what they'd done that day in the Vosges foothills, they'd tell the simple truth. They'd held their position. They'd done their duty, and when the moment came, they'd fought like every other American soldier fought with everything they had, for everyone beside them until the job was done. The proving never stopped. But neither, Morse thought as they disappeared into the winter twilight, did they?